The first thing you need to recognize is that we have an understanding that we were connected to the Creator before we were born. We're connected to the Creator as we live our lives, and we're connected to the Creator after we pass over. And there's nothing to break that connection. We're also connected to the creation, and we're connected to the earth. We call the earth our mother. And that is not an inanimate thing. That's an actual living, working, breathing, spiritual, relational thing. So the term land or earth is not an it. It's a person. And it's a relationship. We are told that we need to be careful how we treat our mother. And that's the context that we work from as Aboriginal people. You can't buy or sell your own mother. You can't clear cut your own mother. You can't scrape a big hole in the ground and dig out resources of your mother without there being consequences to that relationship. And just as we are supposed to take care of our own mothers when they get older or frail or fragile or they're sick or hurting or whatever, that's the responsibility we as Native people see the world as, that we are responsible too. Another issue is that we do not have an understanding of ownership. We don't own land, property, people, anything. The land owns us, is expressed sometimes. We belong to the land because it's a relationship. So the second thing that comes out of this understanding of a connection is relationship, 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 relationship. We have stories that we are related to trees because our stories on the west coast here in Instalo is that people were providing for people and Creator turned them into the cedars to continue to provide for us as people. Or transformer stones where people were doing good things for our people and they became stones as demarkers for sacred sites. And that brings us to another point where everything is sacred. So if you treat the relationship as key, and we are all connected, we're connected to the earth, and it's a sacred connection, then we are responsible not only to our mother, but to each other, without any understanding of ownership. That also is a concept that been shown to me, that we are completely dependent upon Creator, creation, and each other. And in some, I spent time with an elder named Herb Joe, and some of the things that he had been taught, he taught me. And one of the things that stands out in my mind, his name is Takwalatsa. He's from, I think he's Czech, I'm not sure, in the Fraser Valley in Chilliwack. But he, as an elder, said that he was taught that we are all poor, pitiful, helpless human beings. And without Creator, creation, and each other, we can't live. So we are not on the top of the food chain. And the other story he told me is that we were created last. And we learned how to be human beings from Creator, from our Mother Earth, and also from the animals in the animal family that we are actually related to. So we are not in charge of, we belong to. So it's a different way of looking at the world. And an idea of relationship is also how we measure wealth. It's not what we own. It's not what we have. It's who we belong to. So Mennonites are really good at this because they come from large families. And that for us is a wealth. So when you hear people, our First Nations people speak in meetings and gatherings and so forth, they don't tell you what they own or what they've accumulated, including a BA or a MA or a PhD or severe of influence, but it's who they're related to. And so they'll talk about the relationship to the land, where they come from, the relationship to family or their territory, and then their real family and their name. And that shows you who they belong to, but it's also an invitation that they're inviting you to. So I wanted to give you some of that context. Just as a brief introduction to Uncle, I met Uncle when he was working for Skwah Nation. I was kind of on my way out, going to other kind of work, and I got to meet him, and I had known Uncle as a person who was involved with his people out here, teaching on the medicine wheel at the time, and goes a little bit back. And then I ran into him again a few years later working for Skwah in Chilliwack, doing the same thing for people in recovery and addictions and social work. Has a long history of working with our people, knows the Skwah language, knows the traditions and cultures, and I've been so fortunate to follow him into the Sweat Lodge recently. I just want to ask you if you give a great welcome to Uncle Eddie Gardner as he shares from his heart about the land.
Wow, really, look at this up here.
Sorry.
It's okay. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's quite it's very encouraging to see each and every one of you respond to the call to spend some time and think about matters of great import within the context of the Bible, within the context of spirituality. Following Matt is quite a challenge. He set the bar pretty high. That was a very in-depth and enlightening kind of a presentation for myself, and it has encouraged me to learn a little more about the Bible in the context of where we are as humanity today. And we have a beautiful college here. I want to thank the CBC for inviting me here to be a part of this morning's work. And it makes me think about what Stephen Point has in his heart. He has a dream. He would like to have a Skwah Studies Institute. And the Skwah Studies Institute would be very much related to the land and the seasons and our language. In today's world, when we talk about a worldview, we think about the globe, the planet, the whole planet. And the whole planet has been shrunk to what people now call a global village. This is a little global village. And David Suzuki, he calls it the blue dot. That's this tiny little blue dot among billions and billions of stars and galaxies. And here we are. I was at a family constellations workshop, and this facilitator, she asked people to close their eyes just for a few minutes and think about those two great lineages that we all have, a mother and a father. And just go back in memory as far as you can go. And remember one or two people who had an impact on how you are today. And once we were able to kind of think of that, we were asked to say thank you. Thank you for helping make me a part of who I am. When we go back in our ancestries, on our mother and our father's side, when we go back far enough, we come to understand that we come from different nations We come from different parts of the globe. Even myself, I recognize and acknowledge myself as Wilmot, but I also have European ancestry. On my mother's side, I have English ancestry. And on my dad's side, I have Scottish ancestry. And part of our family lineage goes to Hawaii, so I'm part Hawaiian. And I'm part Shekwetmuk. I'm also part Stalo. So I'm what some people call a Heinz 57. And it's really important for us to embrace all the parts of who we are, everything of who we are. And when we go back in those two great lineages far enough, we come to realize that we all come from the same source. We all come from the same source. The mother and father of all creation, male and female, two great lineages. And that's part of what our worldview is about. I have a book here called The Power of Place, The Problem of Time. And it was written by Keith Thor, who spent many, many years among the Stalo people. And there's a foreword by Sonny McKelsey, and I think some of you know Sonny McKelsey. He's a great historian himself. And I think that this book kind of places itself a little bit in the context of what Matt was talking about, the power of place and the problem of time. When we look at the Bible, we look at it in the context of a place. It wasn't in Canada, it wasn't down in South America, it wasn't in Africa. It was in Israel. That was the place. Yet some of the teachings and some of the values and moral teachings people around the world can relate to. And when we look at our worldview here, we look at it within a context of our place, this area here. And our relationship with Creator is much different than the Bible, Christianity. It is much different. Originally, when we look at our territory, we see a time in our history when everything was mixed up, when everything was in chaos. And the Creator, the Great Mother and the Great Father, sent transformers down into our territory. Those great transformers, Krachels, we call it in our language, Krachels and Telswayel. They came and as Brander mentioned, they did a lot of transformations through our territory. And Stephen Point likes to tell everybody that those transformations in our territory reflect a code of ethics, a moral code of ethics in the landscape, in a rock, in stone, like Brander mentioned. He transformed those who were not doing what they were supposed to be doing into stone. And he transformed those who were doing good things into our, what we call today, resources. And that's the cedar tree, our tree of life, and the salmon. We acknowledge the salmon as our relatives, much the same way as we acknowledge the cedar tree. And just to explain a little bit about what the significance of that. there was a whale that swam up from the big ocean all the way up the river and winded up in Harrison. And Chachals saw that whale and said, "What are you doing here?" And the whale said, "Well, I followed all the salmon up here. I'm the biggest fish and I can take all I need, and even more if I want." And Chachals said, "This is not your place. You belong in the big ocean down there. You shouldn't be up here. Your place is in the big waters where you have all that you need. You don't need to take more than what you need." And so Chachals transformed that whale into a stone. And you can still see that stone out at Harrison Lake. And so there are other great transformations when we walk and move through our territory. We see a code of ethics. Do not take more than what you really need. It's written in stone. So this is how we pass on the teachings that Creator has given to us about the importance of giving and receiving. Because there was a guy, his name was Pei, and he was a very generous and a resourceful person. And he went around and he helped out people the best way he could. And after a lifetime of doing being so generous with his spirit, Charles transformed that man into the cedar tree. And that's why when we look at the cedar now, we claim that cedar as our relative. Because the cedar is our tree of life and it represents generosity. That generosity is spirit that we need to emulate more and more. And when we look at the cedar tree about what it does about giving and receiving, those are the values that we need to follow as human beings. So the worldview, when we look at the worldview, we look at the worldview through the lens of our spiritual connections in this part of the territory. It's something that we can translate into what all human beings need in terms of a code of ethics, a code of conduct, of how we need to relate, not only to one another, but to the environment as well, to our relatives in the natural world. How important it is for us to follow natural law. These are fundamental tenets that would allow us as humanity, as human beings, to live and thrive in harmony with one another and with the natural world in a safe manner. When we look at the history of the world, and we look at Christianity in the context of religious supremacy, we need only go to the doctrine of discovery, the papal bull, where they had written, they decided the archbishops or a group of people in Rome, they decided that they would create this doctrine of discovery. And it was called terra nullius. Terra nullius is empty land. So when the Christians went out to the world to discover new parts of this globe, if there were no Christians, then it would be empty land. Even if there were people there who were not Christians, you would call that terra nullius, and they had the right to discover and colonize that part of the world. There's something wrong with that. But I'm not here to make too big of an issue about that part. Because we're all human beings, and we all depend on one another around the world. What happens in China impacts us. What happens in Australia impacts us. What happens here in our territory impacts the rest of Canada and North America and the world. It has a huge, huge impact. We all have a stake to come together. When we talk about spirituality in the Bible and religion, none of that means anything if we can't survive on this planet. So we have to put our hearts and our minds together as one and look at the world through a different lens. In the past, we looked at religion and the state. And there was lots of debates about whether or not we needed to separate, religion from the state. But there's a new order that is going on right now that is starting to override the laws of the state, and it has trodden on moral standards that are promoted by religions, and that is corporate power. Corporations are taking over the world. And we can have a really good long discussion just about corporate power, religious power, and state power. And when you come down to it, we're faced with a situation just as Matt had described on Burnaby Mountain, where a corporation has the right to bull its way through a territory. They call it twinning the Trans-Mountain pipeline, because they have a right-of-way. So when they have a right-of-way, they're going to double it. Once that has taken place, then their occupation and right expands, and they will be allowed to put another pipeline through as well and take up more space and control of a territory, even through municipalities like Burnaby and Vancouver. The Stalo people, as other Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island, have a deep respect and reverence for our sacred Mother Earth. The old ones began important meetings related to the land and the waters with this statement: and that means this is our homeland. We have to take care of everything that belongs to us. That's a sacred duty to do that. So, when we take care of our land, it means taking care of the sacred waters and the air with the thought of benefiting the next 7 generations. Embodying this philosophy or way of being, we need to think of the vision of our ancestors, which is to live in harmony with the natural world, to follow natural laws by not taking from the natural world more than what we need. We encourage everyone to embrace this important worldview, and like torches rekindled, find the light of our ancestors inside our own hearts and carry it through the darkness of these troubled times. We must respect and honor all that is not human. When matter is seen as devoid of spirit, then nature can be desecrated without a second thought. When one form of nature is seen as devoid of spirit, then all forms of life can be desecrated without a single thought. For this reason, the spirit warrior sees the world as a divine homeland, shared by the living and the dead, and for those not yet born. The more you put the worldview of the ancestors into practice, the more you have to offer others. Ethics emerges from bad judgment. They are the collective memory of what does not benefit the whole. Those who work together to serve others must encourage one another to maintain humility and respect at all times, even in private. Principles emerge from ethics. They are the collective memory of what is worth striving for. Peace is achieved when leaders are content and sincere. Prosperity is achieved when leaders do not concentrate the wealth. Nothing holds people together better than sustained peace and prosperity. We leave no one behind. All must benefit, including our relatives in the natural world. Wisdom emerges from principles. It is the collective memory of what produces happiness. Those who evaluate their own conduct, building on their successes and correcting their faults, dwell together in shared well-being. This is the road of freedom that leads to our collective benefit, to peace and happiness. The single most pressing issue facing Canada and the world is global warming. Global warming is here, and it is going to get even worse if we all stop, even if we all stop using fossil fuels immediately. As depressing as this is, it will mean the end of life on Earth if we continue business as usual and make no effort to stop using fossil fuels. Doing nothing about this is not the answer. It is becoming more imperative all the time to move towards developing clean energy technology and promote every opportunity to create local economies instead of feeding into the global economy that has fossil fuel fever and has affected each and every one of us. Why is this critical? Wild salmon. As I mentioned, is what we consider a relative of ours. And as the salmon goes, so do we. We say that Iyuch latzout yastzakwi kasu latzout to slak'amach. That means if you destroy the salmon, you destroy the world. And the reason why I say that is because in this part of the world, our sacred wild salmon is at the center of this dark industrial storm that is looming over this province right now, this part of the world. It's coming under the threat of LNG, fracking, that is destroying water. It's coming with big oil. There's a danger of an oil spill when you increase the traffic of transportation of bitumen coming from the tar sands. Kinder Morgan has its way. It's going to only create an expansion of the tar sands in northern Alberta that has desecrated that part of the world and has caused the local people there to experience cancer and sickness. All the animals that have to drink the water in that area are getting sick and are dying as well. Wild salmon make the forest grow, pulling carbon out of the atmosphere and providing humans with oxygen that we need to breathe. Wild salmon, in essence, is a global climate stabilizer. Wild salmon is essential to the maintenance of biodiversity as it feeds multiple species from the headwaters of the river systems to the big ocean. Wild salmon is an integral part of the social, cultural, physical, and spiritual well-being of Indigenous peoples in this part of the world. In today's world, preserving wild salmon is an international responsibility, as wild salmon know no borders. This is a particular concern to British Columbia, Washington, and Alaska, and other countries. So when we look at the context of religion and the Bible, it's important for us to maintain that moral high ground and look at all of the issues that are facing us today in that context and decide for ourselves, each and every one of us, what should we do individually and collectively to change the course of history. Because if we don't change the course of history, we're going to leave an unbearable living condition for future generations. And it's happening much quicker than people think. There are people who dispute this, and there are people who like to deny what is going on. And there we look at the separation of religion and science. The International Panel on Climate Change has involved some 2,500 scientists in 130 countries around the globe. And they have concluded it's irrefutable. Nobody on this planet can deny climate change is happening, and it's caused by human activity. And the human activity that is the worst, of course, not to our advantage, is the extraction of fossil fuels, the transportation of fossil fuels, and the burning of fossil fuels that is going to be heating up our climate. It's out of control right now. It's really serious. But there are other threats. As we see with Imperial Metals, the Poly Mines breach. On August the 4th, 2014, Imperial Metals, Mount Poly Mine Corporation unleashed billions of gallons of toxic wastewater from their massive tailings storage facility in Poly Lake. The toxic wastewater rushed, ripping out a 300-foot wide scar in the forest of where Hazeltine Creek used to be. The contaminated wastewater further spilled into Quesnel Lake, which connects to Quesnel River and the Fraser River watershed. Imperial Metals was issued 5 warnings about the tailings storage facility, which was already spilling over in May of 2014. Imperial Metals has failed at mining, and the province of BC failed in its oversight of their operations. This company will not deal with the aftermath of mining disasters directly resulting from their own negligence and greed. Yet, with provincial approval, Imperial Metals is already operating or plans to operate mines with the same tailings dam design as Mount Poly Mine in Tahltan Territory, Ahousaht Territory, Tla'akiat Territory, Southern Secwepemc Territory, and already has a mine in operation in Wet'suwet'en Territory. Imperial Metals cannot be trusted. So what is the solution? People say, "What, Eddie, you're just talking about problems. What about the doggone solutions?" The solution is to put a moratorium on mining until legislative reforms and regulations are in place that will prevent another mining disaster. Require Imperial Metals to stop leaking their toxic tailings into Quesnel watershed and to clean up their mess they irresponsibly caused with reckless disregard to the Quesnel River system that holds the world's second largest wild salmon run. Require Imperial Metals to restore the ecosystem they severely degraded. Impose penalties on Imperial mines for disruptions they caused to the municipalities and First Nations in the impacted area. The loss of salmon for us as Secwepemc is a matter of life and death of our culture. Can our salmon survive this devastation? That's a quote from Jean William, who's a Secwepemc woman there, living up in that area. We talk about Kinder Morgan and Enbridge and fracking gas. There is a growing awareness and understanding that fossil fuels are exhaustible, increasingly expensive, and politically, ecologically, and climatically toxic. We need to prevent BC from becoming a fossil fuel dump site. We must avoid allowing corporations to use BC as a sacrifice zone, even if we have to have the approval, even if they have the approval of governments that are not looking after the people they are elected to represent. We have truly crossed the red line, which is being ignored by the power elites. The feverish drive to exhaust fossil fuels, which are finite, will see the massive global economy hit the proverbial wall when demand exceeds supply. The fact is that we are entering into an era when global warming caused by extreme extraction of fossil fuels is dangerously becoming unmanageable and irreversible. The drive to extract every last drop of oil and gas from the earth will only quicken the closing door of opportunity to steer away from an unbearable living condition on this planet. With respect to geotechnology, there are no emergency techno fixes without unknown side effects that would dangerously make things worse. The solution to global warming is not to fix the world, but to fix us. We humans are the problem. We all have a stake in building livable communities while we still have the chance. So there goes Eddie complaining again. What's the solution? The solution is to build a new economy that is sustainable and safe. British Columbia and Canada needs to see the value and need to divest from fossil fuels and invest heavily in wind, solar, and geothermal technology to power a robust green economy that creates long-term meaningful employment. Form a new order whereby government and industry keep the vast majority of fossil fuel reserves in the ground and out of our common atmosphere, and provide enabling legislation and financial investments and subsidies for a rapid transition to renewable energy. Building public transportation systems would go a long way to wean us off fossil fuels. An enforceable legal framework needs to be established to enable, support, and promote an emerging green economy, including organic small farms, wild fisheries, responsible mining, ecotourism, and regulated forestry practices. Dr. Vandana Shiva, an Indian environmental activist and anti-globalization author, points out that shifting to an agricultural modeled on agroecological methods would not only sequester large amounts of carbon, it would reduce emissions and increase healthy food security. Legal precedents supporting constitutionally established Aboriginal rights and entitled would be an essential part of the foundation of this legal framework. Enshrining in the Constitution of Canada the right to a clean environment as promoted by David Suzuki would reinforce building the legal framework for a sustainable and safe economy. Science continues to tell us that we need to keep the vast majority of proven fossil fuel reserves in the ground and provide sufficient resources and expertise for rapid transition to renewable energy. Then we have the FIPA Accord. Has anybody heard about the FIPA? How many? Know about that? Yeah? It's controversial, isn't it? FIPA. What is that? FIPA. That is the Foreign Investment Protection and Promotion Agreement between China and Canada. It is essential that we declare this null and void. FIPA was undemocratically approved in the absence of debate in the House of Commons and violates the duty to consult First Nations under Section 35 of the Constitution of Canada. FIPA erodes Canadian sovereignty through a provision in this agreement that allows China to sue Canada for the loss of expected profits that would be determined through binding arbitration in a secret tribunal. Yep, that's right, folks. This makes the entire Canadian legal system irrelevant, including the Supreme Court of Canada. The provision also makes environmental protection measures by any level of government subject to financial costs Canadians would be unable to afford. That includes Burnaby, folks. They're trying to stop the pipeline going through. That interferes with China's interest for expected profits. That could wind up costing us money if we continue to acknowledge and accept that FIPA is okay and not null and void. The Harper government ratified FIPA despite the fact that a legal challenge from the Skwah First Nation is still before the courts. The deal with China has already been ratified, and this has gone into effect October the 1st, 2014, and locks Canada into the sweeping agreement for 31 years. So what's the solution? The solution would be to support Skwah First Nation's request to other First Nations across Canada and to municipalities to write the People's Republic of China stating that they do not acknowledge the China-Canada Foreign Investment Promotion and Protection Agreement, commonly known as FIPA. This would be a good thing for the churches to do as well. Canadians can approach their city councils and ask them to follow suit. As municipalities, power to protect their citizens will be overridden by the Canada FIPA Accord, especially those municipalities who have taken a stand and barred Kinder Morgan and Enbridge's Northern Gateway from pipelines entering their jurisdiction. Together, we must make it clear to the People's Republic of China that the government of Canada did not follow due process by consulting First Nations, municipalities, Parliament, and the citizens of Canada. Salmon is important, as I mentioned. So there's another issue that is related to the aquaculture industry on the coast of BC. A message that we need to promote is to revoke fish farm leases and promote sustainable land-based aquaculture. The federal government is currently enabling and promoting an aggressive 41% expansion of fish farms along the migration routes of Fraser sockeye salmon. This is in defiance of the Cohen Commission recommendations related specifically to fish farms, and there are no plans to view fish farm locations in relation to inward-outward migration of wild salmon. Government critics say Ottawa has still not adequately responded to Cohen's recommendations, and if it did, their response is shrouded in secrecy. Atlantic salmon feedlots are breeding grounds for amplifying sea lice. These feedlots are like incubating wards of viruses with European strains, most likely imported to Canada in Atlantic eggs from Norway. These pathogens flow out of those open net cages and can spread to Fraser River sockeye smolts that swim past those open net pens in the narrow straits between Vancouver Island and the mainland. Tons of growing Atlantic salmon trapped in open net pens release their untreated feces that degrade the marine environment. The Harper government removed Section 36 of the Fisheries Act to allow the release of substances harmful to fish because the salmon farmers need more drugs to fight sea lice. The DFO mandate is no longer even includes wild salmon anymore. As the Harper government moves closer to 2015 election, it is in a hurry to change laws to prop up fish farm industry at the expense of wild salmon and its habitat. Dr. Alexandra Morton's posting, DFO's mandate, is not what you think. And there's a reference to her website here. The above actions of the Harper government pose a real threat to Aboriginal fisheries, raising a duty to consult with River First Nations people. So what's the solution to this? The solution is, in response to this, we need to mobilize First Nations along the river to pressure the federal government to stop its assault on the Fraser River sockeye salmon and its habitat. Measures to accomplish this would include implementing the Cohen Commission recommendations, supporting the First Nations Wild Salmon Alliance, supporting the Fraser River Declaration, endorsing net pen farm salmon boycott, of which I'm the coordinator, and also to ensure that net pen farm that we support a regulated closed containment land-based Atlantic salmon aquaculture industry away from the Fraser River wild salmon migration routes. So there are many other issues that are related to industry and what it's doing to the land, to the earth. One, of course, is Monsanto. I don't know how many people know about Monsanto and what they're doing, supposedly to feed the world, but they're feeding the rich people instead, and they're degrading the environment and producing food we don't even know whether we're eating or not. There's no labels on genetically modified foods, and Monsanto is behind all of that. There's Site C Dam, that's going to flood a lot of farmland in the north. Global warming, once again, is heating up the planet so much that in California there are massive droughts that are taking place, and the farmland that they once had, they can no longer use. So their agricultural land down there, where we get a lot of our food in the supermarkets, is going to be shrinking as we move into the future more and more. And what are we doing here in Canada? We're flooding, prime agricultural land, such as what is going to take place with the Site C Dam. We shouldn't support that. So when we talk about religion, We talk about the principles that come out of the Bibles, Taoism, Buddhism, First Nation spirituality, all of that. We need to kind of look at what are the guiding values and principles that we need to use. We need a radical evolution founded on values of respect for natural laws, cooperation with nature, a spiritual connection that honors our interconnectedness, and sharing both the benefits of what our environment bestows upon us and responsibility to give back by protecting and preserving clean water, air, and land. We must, if we are to survive, balance this giving and receiving. Some of the values that we need to embrace, and I put this out to you, is don't take from nature more than you need. Consume less and buy local. We must no longer use the atmosphere as a free waste dump. We can't ravage the earth and have no consequences. Centralized power in the hands of corporations must be decentralized through regulations that protect the environment and the life within it, including human beings. There are limits to Earth's ability to absorb pollution. There are boundary limits we cross at our own peril. We need a reciprocal relationship with nature. Ecosystems know how to self-regulate. Corporations don't. It is we humans who are weak, fragile, and vulnerable, and it is the earth that is hardy and powerful. Condense intent into actions that foster peace and prosperity for all. Avoid greed, materialism, and aggression like a poisoned well. Hold a moral high ground and graciously serve your ideals to benefit the greater good of all. Embrace a worldview based on regeneration and renewal rather than domination and depletion. Movements of people have to step into any leadership vacuum to take responsible direction of reducing catastrophic climate warming. Foster and support a political will to enforce environmental protection regulations. Eliminate subsidies to fossil fuel companies, corporations, and subsidize renewable clean energy industries. Keep climate warming gases out of our shared atmosphere. That is so important. So folks, as wild salmon go, so do we. Thank you for your attention. We'll see you.